Welcome back to episode 3 in this series. Today we're going to use the custom generators and scaffold templates that we did previously to show you how you can increase your efficiency in your workflow. We're going to scaffold out companies, we're going to scaffold out roles, we're going to modify the users that was created as part of Excite, we're going to set up all the necessary models which will be required to integrate with Jack in the next episode. Let's get into it. As you can tell, I've already started my Rails server in Docker. We've also started a bash console into the Jack example repository. After yesterday's episode, I noticed my error where I had named it Jack Dummy rather than Jack Example, so everything has been standardized. We can list all of the available generators by typing bin/relsg --help. This will give us a list of all of the built-in Rails generators as well as any others that we have created ourselves. The one that we're really concerned about here is the scaffold one. Each generator can also take the --help argument as well. So if we say bin/relsg scaffold --help, it will give us an example of what it expects and what it's going to output. We're going to start off by making a basic company resource, which will have a name and a boolean for active. So the output of that gives you a lot of different things that the scaffold generator can do. What we're really concerned about is what are the files it's going to create. So there's actually a thing called pretend mode. So if I take out the --help and say, I'm going to call it company, and I'm going to say name as the string, and I'm going to say active as a boolean, and if I do -p for pretend and then hit enter, it will give me a list of all the files that it would create and where it's going to create them. If you recall from previous episodes, we added another partial that was going to get copied out called _actions. So you can see here that yes, our templates are being invoked. Given the result of the pretend mode, we know that this is the one that we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the -p and go ahead and let it run. So now that the scaffold generator has ran, what we want to do first is we want to open up the database migration for creating companies. This is a standard Rails migration. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that all companies default to not being active. Default false. By setting a default value in the migration here, it will ensure that all new companies created will be inactive unless otherwise specified. So the next thing I want to do after having looked at the migrations is to actually run Rails db migrate. And I want to make sure that I run it both in the development environment as well as the test environment. And I can ensure that it runs in the test environment by just appending Rails_env equals test, because as you recall from secrets.env, when we start the container, we default Rails_env to development. Okay, so now that we have run that migration, we can verify that by opening up db schema, and we can see here there's a string column for name, there's a boolean column for active, along with the timestamps, and it has a table for companies. So we know that that worked. We can open up the company's factory file so that we can start integrating tests for this new resource that we've done. So now that I've got the factory set up, the next thing to do would be to say, will the specs run? Okay, so we can see there's some failures, which is great. Even though it fails, we know that it's working because it's failing in the way in which we expect it to fail. Now let's start adding some of that core logic. Now, by default, I probably want companies to be sorted by name. So A's at the top, Z's at the bottom. So I'll change that scope there. As I said earlier, we want companies to be required to provide us a name, and that name has to be unique, and it shouldn't matter whether there's uppercase or lowercase in that. So now we have the expected output. Let's add the code to actually add the validators. False. Now if we go back and run the specs a second time, they should all pass. Okay, so now if we try to run the full specs again, they're going to fail because we need to make some updates into the controller specs to pass in invalid attributes. You notice there's only a pending spec, and the ones that were failing previously are now passing. What is this? So if we go to company controller spec, one of the things that I have done with the scaffold is just to assume that every model is going to have some kind of name attribute. In this case of company, there's actually a name attribute. And what I do with the templates is I say, if I want to make a record invalid, then I'll default that to saying an invalid attribute is this model with the name nilled out. Right here is where it does that skip, and we're getting that output message. I'm a generator, but you still need to do some work here to tell me what to expect. So by default, in this test, it's creating a company factory. What we're doing is we're passing a new attribute where the new name will be my name. And what we need to do is to say, if I do that, we want to make sure that that change actually takes place. So far, the only things I've had to do was to add the default faults on the migration. I've had to create 3 specs, and I've had to delete 1 line of code in this spec here. With that accomplished, everything should almost be in place to have that entire resource set up. Let's go ahead and check the routes, and you can see right here that it put in companies. So let's move this down below users, and then we also want to go to, I believe it's nav bar, because we need to be able to actually get a link to that. All right, let's go over to the app and see. Okay, now companies is there, so we should be able to go through the whole thing. We can list all the companies, which there aren't any. We can create a new company, which creates it with ID 1. We can go back to all companies. Oh, it's not there. What happened? As part of the setup, I actually use data tables to pull in the index for doing the searching, sorting, filtering, and other things. Observant viewers will notice earlier in the scaffold that it created JSON views for companies. So if I just append companies.json onto here, you'll notice, oh, here's some JSON data back. So the main important thing is that the JSON actually works currently. If I reload this now, it's complaining that data tables can't initialize stuff. It's kind of there, but it's kind of not. You can see the name and the active, but it's not pulling in created or updated. So one of the things we'll have to do is go back over to the partial for company. Okay. Let's go back and try it again. And as you can tell, now it works. The thing to note here is that the scaffold generators are not meant to be the be-all, end-all of everything. It's meant to get something running quickly. You'll notice that there are things that I do have to change, and there are probably ways that I could improve the scaffold generators. But it's reducing the amount of work that I have to do. In future editions, I'll probably get rid of CoffeeScript in favor of ES6 or something else. From this point, I can do further integration with data tables to add a filter to say, show me only active companies or show me only inactive companies. The possibilities are endless. The point is to get you up and running quickly and to leave you with as few to-dos as possible. It's not a perfect system, but it certainly is faster, and you can customize it to your own workflow. So with that, I'm going to scaffold out the rest of the resources that we'll need in order to integrate with Jack, the dynamic database-backed permissions engine with a custom DSL for role-based authorization, which has support for multi-tenancy.